Across the country, nurses are facing a quiet financial crisis. This is about one who hit her breaking point in a hospital stairwell, sobbing that she needed $10,000 by Friday. She had no idea the man standing behind her listening was a billionaire. Why would a man worth billions care about one stranger's debt? The reason will change how you see desperation and the people who walk past it every single day. Her name was Sarah, a dedicated pediatric nurse. His name was Elias Vance, a reclusive tech billionaire. In that moment, their two radically different worlds collided. But this isn't just a story about a lucky break. It's about the hidden crisis pushing our healthcare workers to the brink and the shocking reason a man who had everything would risk it all to intervene. To understand that moment in the stairwell, you have to go back to the beginning, to the debt that started it all. Sarah's debt wasn't from reckless spending. It was the quiet tax on caring, $85,000 in student loans for her nursing degree, another $12,000 on credit cards from the months her mother was sick, covering copays and prescriptions her insurance wouldn't touch. She was a pediatric nurse at Mercy General, working the night shift in the oncology unit. Her days were a cycle of delicate IV lines, comforting terrified parents, and calculating morphine doses down to the microgram. She was brilliant at her job, and she was drowning. The $10,000 demand had a name, Tony, not a loan shark in the classic sense, but a cousin who'd fronted her the money for her mother's final funeral costs 2 years prior. The terms had been vague family help until they were. Now he was texting daily. The latest message received that afternoon was clear: Friday, last chance, or I go to your boss. They'll love to know their angel nurse is a deadbeat. Her nursing license, her reputation, everything was on the line. Meanwhile, Elias Vance was at Mercy General for a reason few knew. He wasn't there for a board meeting or a photo op. He was in the neurology wing, sitting quietly beside the bed of his former mentor, Professor Alastair Finn. The old man was dying, and Vance visited every Thursday, a secret pilgrimage away from the Silicon Valley spotlight. His fortune, estimated at $4.3 billion, was built on predictive algorithms. He could forecast market shifts and consumer behavior, but he couldn't predict the one thing that mattered most to him now: time. On that Thursday, Sarah's shift had been a special kind of hell. A 7-year-old patient named Leo had taken a sudden turn. She spent 2 hours helping the team stabilize him, her hands steady but her heart racing. During a moment of calm, she'd checked her phone. Another text from Tony. A screenshot this time of a drafted email addressed to the hospital's director of nursing. The subject line: employee misconduct and financial fraud. The pressure cooker finally burst at 3:17 in the morning. During her legally mandated break, she fled to the stark concrete stairwell between the 4th and 5th floors, the only place she could guarantee silence. She slid down against the wall, the weight of the debt, the sick children, the memory of her mother, and the threat to her career collapsing on her all at once. That's when the sobs broke through. She called her older sister, the only person she thought might understand. I don't know what to do. He needs it by Friday. I've asked everyone. I've got nothing left. I need $10,000 by Friday or I lose everything. What she didn't hear was the soft click of a door closing one flight above her. Elias Vance had just left Professor Finn's room. He'd taken the stairs for the same reason she had: privacy. He stopped on the landing, frozen by the raw despair in a stranger's voice. He listened, not to eavesdrop, but because the anguish was unmistakable. A professional, he guessed, by the scrubs he'd glimpsed through the railing. A female, and she was out of options. For a man who solved planetary-scale problems, this was a shockingly small human-scale crisis. $10,000. To him, it was a rounding error, less than the interest his wealth earned in an hour. To her, it was an existential threat. The algorithm in his mind, the one that calculated risk and opportunity, spun uselessly. But something else, something deeper and long buried, stirred. He didn't reveal himself. He waited until her call ended and her crying subsided into shaky silence. Then he quietly retreated back up the stairs. He had a decision to make. Intervening meant breaking his own strict rule: never get personally involved. It could open him up to manipulation, to scandal, to endless requests. But walking away meant ignoring a specific, solvable suffering happening in the exact building where he was confronting the one suffering he couldn't solve. Back in his car, his driver asked for the destination. Vance didn't answer immediately. He pulled out his phone and did something his security team would have forbidden. He opened a people search app he'd invested in years ago, using only the fragment of information he'd overheard: nurse, Mercy General, 10,000 by Friday, and cross-referencing it with the hospital's public staff directory. He began to filter. It took him less than 4 minutes to land on a likely candidate. Sarah Chen, pediatric oncology. Her professional photo showed a woman with kind, tired eyes. This was the turning point. The billionaire now had a name, he had a face, and he had the absolute power to fix her problem with a single transfer. But here, where the story twists, instead of sending the money, he did something far more dangerous. He decided he needed to see her, to understand the person behind the desperation. So he devised a plan, a way to approach her that wouldn't send her running. He would go back to the hospital, not as Elias Vance, billionaire, but as someone else entirely. He told his driver to head home. He had arrangements to make. The first move in a high-stakes game of anonymous intervention was about to be played, and Sarah Chen had no idea her life was now being observed by one of the most powerful and secretive men in the country. The clock was ticking down to Friday, and Elias Vance was no longer just a bystander. The next day at 11 a.m., a man named Leo's uncle Mark walked into the pediatric oncology ward. He was dressed in affordable business casual, carried a simple tablet, and asked for Nurse Sarah Chen by name. He said he was there to discuss a charitable donation in his nephew's honor. It was a perfect cover, and it was Elias Vance's first move. Sarah, bleary-eyed from another sleepless night, was confused but professional. She led the polite stranger to a quiet family consult room. "I'm sorry, Mr. Mark, just Mark. My nephew Leo was in here last month. You were incredibly kind to him, to us." Sarah's face softened with genuine recognition. "Leo, of course, how is he?" "Home, stable, thanks to people like you." Vance's performance was understated, devoid of the commanding presence he used in boardrooms. "I wanted to give back. I'd like to make a donation to the unit, specifically to the Staff Support Fund, but I'd feel better discussing it with someone who's actually on the floor. Would that be you?" It was a masterstroke. He was offering a legitimate, even noble reason for a private conversation. For the next 20 minutes, he asked thoughtful questions about the unit's needs, for staff, for families. He took notes on his tablet, and he observed the dark circles under her eyes that makeup couldn't hide, the way her hands trembled slightly when she lifted her coffee cup, the palpable aura of exhaustion that went beyond a tough shift. As their meeting wrapped up, he performed his second move. "One more thing, Nurse Chen. This is a bit unorthodox, but my family foundation also has a small discretionary fund for frontline caregiver support. Unexpected hardships. I couldn't help but notice you seem stretched very thin. Would you be open to a confidential conversation about that? No obligation, of course." Sarah froze, her professional guard slammed up. "I'm fine, thank you, we're all tired, it's the job." "I understand," Vance said, backing off smoothly. "The offer stands. Here's a secure email just for that fund." He slid a plain white card across the table with a single email address on it. "If anything changes before Friday." The mention of Friday was a calculated risk. Her eyes snapped to his, wide with shock and sudden suspicion. "Why did you say Friday?" He kept his expression neutral. "Just a figure of speech, end of the week, but your reaction tells me I might be right about the hardship." He stood, ending the pressure. "Think about it, no one will know." He left her sitting there, staring at the card, her mind racing. Was this a coincidence, a trap, a bizarre act of kindness? The paranoia was almost worse than the debt. Vance returned to his penthouse, his disguise discarded. He had seen what he needed. Her desperation was real, and her pride was a formidable wall. A direct cash transfer would be rejected, or worse, reported. He needed a more elegant solution. He called his most trusted attorney, a woman named Anya Desai, and gave her 2 tasks. First, to legally and anonymously acquire Sarah's debt from her cousin Tony. Second, to draft a binding, non-disclosure agreement for a new, fictitious clinical trial that just happened to have a $10,000 participant stipend. Meanwhile, Sarah's Thursday was unraveling. Tony sent a final text. 48 hours, don't test me. A patient's parent yelled at her over delayed medication, reducing her to tears in the supply closet. And then, at 4 p.m., her sister called. Their father, who lived across the country, had fallen. He was okay, but he needed help. Sarah was the only sibling with medical knowledge. A plane ticket would cost over $800 she did not have. This was the breaking point. Sitting in her car after her shift, in the dark hospital parking garage, she pulled out the white card. She typed a hesitant, one-line email to the address. What would this conversation involve? The response came in 90 seconds. A meeting, tomorrow. A cafe called The Daily Grind, 7 a.m. Come alone. Your privacy is guaranteed. M. She had no reason to trust this. Every instinct screamed scam. But with 24 hours left, no other options, and now a family emergency on top of it, she typed one word: okay. Friday morning, 7 a.m., The Daily Grind was a bustling, anonymous spot downtown. Sarah arrived early, choosing a corner table. Vance arrived 5 minutes later, again as Mark, but dressed even more casually. He bought 2 coffees and joined her. "Thank you for coming," he said, sliding a manila envelope across the table. "Don't open it here. Inside is a cashier's check for $10,000 made out to you. It is a stipend for participating in a fictitious clinical trial. The paperwork is flawless. You can deposit it today. You will owe nothing. You will never hear from me again after this meeting." Sarah stared at the envelope like it was a live snake. "Why? What do you want?" "Nothing." "That's impossible. Nobody does this for nothing." "I do," he said, and for the first time a crack appeared in his Mark persona, a flicker of profound personal pain. "Because 22 years ago, a nurse I didn't know kept a promise to my dying mother. She stayed past her shift to sit with her so she wouldn't be alone. That nurse was fired for it. She lost her income, her stability. My family could have helped. We didn't. We were too wrapped up in our own grief. That failure has haunted me ever since." He was telling the truth. It was the core, hidden motivation behind his entire philanthropic philosophy, one he'd never publicly disclosed. He saw in Sarah a chance for a specific, targeted redemption. Sarah was stunned into silence. The story rang true. The emotion was raw. "Take the check, Sarah," he said, his voice low and urgent. "Solve your immediate problem. Then, if you feel you must repay it, do it this way. The next time you see a colleague struggling, a family drowning in medical bills, you help. You pay it forward. That's the only return I want." He stood to leave, his mission accomplished, but fate intervened. As he turned, a man at the next table, who had been pretending to read a newspaper, stood up abruptly. It was a reporter for a tabloid financial blog, one who had been trying to dig up dirt on Vance's secret charitable activities for months. He recognized the billionaire despite the casual clothes. "Mr. Vance," the reporter called out, phone already recording. "Elias Vance, is this one of your anonymous handouts? Who's the lucky stranger?" The world stopped. Sarah's eyes went from the reporter to the man she knew as Mark. The name Elias Vance meant nothing to her at first, then it clicked. The tech billionaire, the recluse, worth billions. Vance's face hardened into a mask of cold fury. He stepped between the reporter and Sarah. "This is a private conversation. You're trespassing on a private moment." "Is that a cashier's check in that envelope? How much are you giving her? What's her name?" Sarah, in a panic, grabbed the envelope and shoved it into her bag. The motion was caught on the reporter's phone. The cafe was staring. Vance knew the damage was done. The story would be out within the hour. Billionaire's secret charity, hospital nurse in midnight rendezvous. It would paint Sarah as either a victim or a gold digger and destroy her privacy. "Don't say a word," Vance commanded Sarah, his CEO voice emerging for the first time. He turned to the reporter. "You print one word of this, one photo, and my legal team will bury you and your website in lawsuits you cannot imagine. This is a humanitarian matter. You will respect that, or you will be destroyed." He took Sarah's arm and guided her swiftly out of the cafe, leaving the reporter momentarily stunned, but already typing on his phone. The genie was out of the bottle. Sarah had the money to save herself, but she was now entangled in a very public, very dangerous game with one of the world's most private men. And the clock hadn't just run out on her debt. It had started ticking on a whole new crisis. The article hit the web at 9:47 a.m. The headline was brutal. "Billionaire's breakfast bribe. Is Elias Vance buying influence with hospital staff? It included a blurred photo of Sarah's face and the envelope. By 10:15, she was summoned to the director of nursing's office. Sitting across from Director Helen Pierce, Sarah felt the walls of her professional life crumbling. Pierce had the article pulled up on her tablet. Start from the beginning, Sarah, and understand this is now a legal and compliance matter. Did you solicit funds from a patient's family member? No, he approached me. He said it was a charitable donation for the unit. And the $10,000 personal check. Sarah's throat closed. She couldn't mention the debt, the threat from Tony. It was a stipend for a research trial he mentioned. A trial that doesn't exist, according to our research office. Sarah, this looks terrible. Accepting large, unexplained sums from a billionaire with no formal agreement, the optics are of a payoff. The hospital board is already asking if our nurses are for sale. The meeting ended with Sarah placed on immediate paid administrative leave, pending an internal ethics investigation. Her hospital ID was confiscated. As she walked out in a daze, her personal phone buzzed. It was Tony. He'd seen the article. Clever girl, got a bigger sugar daddy now. My money, today, or I forward everything I have to that hospital director. Let's see how she likes knowing her nurse is a liar and a thief. The trap had snapped shut. She had the money to pay him, but depositing the check now would be evidence against her in the hospital's investigation. She was damned if she did, and destroyed if she didn't. Across town, in the stark silence of his security command center, Elias Vance was watching the fallout in real time. His legal team had fired a cease and desist at the tabloid blog, but the story was already spreading to mainstream business outlets. The narrative was crystallizing, reclusive billionaire caught in a suspicious, secretive cash handoff. Anya Desai, his attorney, was furious. Elias, you broke protocol, you went in person, this was entirely preventable. She needed to see a human being, not a wire transfer, Vance replied, his eyes on a live feed of news channels. The damage is to her, not me. What's the status on the debt acquisition? Completed an hour ago, we own the debt. The cousin, Tony, has been paid off and signed an NDA. He's out, but he was tipped off by the article and made one final threat to her before we silenced him. Vance slammed a hand on the desk. So she's still under threat, and now under investigation, and the money I gave her is toxic. Perfect. He made a decision. If the game was now public, he would change the rules. He ordered Anya to draft a press release, not from his corporate office, but from his personal foundation. It would announce a new $25 million initiative for nurse financial wellness and student loan relief, citing the systemic crisis his team had researched. And it would name Sarah Chen, not as a recipient of charity, but as the inspirational frontline worker whose dedication highlighted the urgent need for the program. He would reframe the narrative from bribery to philanthropic response. But before that release could go out, a second, more devastating story broke. An anonymous source, later revealed to be a disgruntled former Vance Industries employee, leaked internal documents to a major newspaper. They detailed a years-long clandestine operation codenamed Project Guardian. It wasn't just random charity. Vance had a team that used his algorithms to identify individuals in acute financial distress, specifically healthcare workers, teachers, and first responders, and then orchestrate anonymous interventions. He had done this over 300 times at a cost of more than $4 million. Sarah wasn't special. She was a data point. When Sarah read this story on her phone, sitting alone in her apartment, the last bit of warmth from Vance's story about his mother evaporated. She felt sick. She wasn't seen. She was selected. Her despair had been fed into an algorithm, her life scored as a worthy intervention. The personal connection was a lie. It was all a systemic, cold, billionaire experiment in targeted giving. The hospital's investigation escalated. The ethics committee subpoenaed her bank records. They found the pending deposit of the cashier's check. They also found the repeated payments to Tony over the years, which she had to explain were for a family loan. It painted a picture of chronic financial instability and poor judgment. The recommendation, delivered 2 days later, was termination of employment and a report to the state nursing board for a review of her license. This was the wait, it gets worse moment. Sarah wasn't just losing her job, she was facing the permanent loss of her career, the very thing she'd gone into debt to achieve. The $10,000 had become a curse. In her darkest hour, she did the only thing she could think of. She used a small amount of the money to buy a last-minute plane ticket to see her injured father. On the flight, she finally opened the envelope Vance had given her. Behind the check was a single handwritten note on plain paper, not part of the fake trial documents. It read, "The algorithm identifies the crisis, but the choice to act is always human. I chose you, EV." It was a tiny thread of humanity in the cold, exposed machinery of it all. But was it enough? While she was away, Vance's press release dropped. It was a media earthquake. He publicly admitted to Project Guardian, framing it as a necessary response to a broken system. He announced the $25 million fund, and he directly addressed the Sarah Chen situation, stating that her targeting by the press was a profound injustice, and that the hospital's decision to terminate her was being reviewed by his legal team for potential defamation and wrongful dismissal. The hospital, facing a public relations nightmare and the legal fury of a billionaire, suddenly backtracked. They announced Sarah's leave was under reconsideration. The state nursing board received a flood of supportive letters from Vance's foundation, attesting to her character. Sarah returned from visiting her father to find her world flipped again. She was not fired. Her license was not under immediate review. Tony was silent forever, and Elias Vance was now her very public, very controversial benefactor. But this rescue felt like a new cage. She was now permanently the billionaire's nurse. Her colleagues looked at her with pity or jealousy. The media camped outside her apartment. Her private struggle was global news. Vance had solved her financial crisis, but had ignited a crisis of identity and autonomy. She needed to take back control, so she did the one thing Vance would never expect. She requested a meeting with him, not as a beneficiary, but as an equal. She had a proposal, and it would either finalize her freedom or plunge both of them into a final, irreversible confrontation with the systems that had brought them together. The meeting took place not in Vance's tower, but in a neutral conference room at a law firm. Sarah arrived alone. Vance arrived with only his attorney, Anya. For a moment, they just looked at each other, the nurse who had been a data point and the billionaire who had upended her life. Sarah spoke first, her voice steadier than she felt. "You turned my private crisis into a public case study. You didn't save me, you made me a character in your story." Vance accepted the charge with a nod. "You're right, my need for atonement overrode your need for dignity. For that, I am profoundly sorry. Sorry doesn't give me my anonymity back. Sorry doesn't make my colleagues trust me. I have a proposal." Anya shifted, but Vance held up a hand. "Let's hear it." Sarah laid out a single sheet of paper. "I will publicly accept the position as the founding director of your new nurse wellness initiative, not as a figurehead, as a real director with a real salary, real authority over how the $25 million is spent, and a seat on your foundation's board. My first act will be to dismantle Project Guardian's algorithm. No more secret selections. We build an open application process, a transparent grant system. We help people without turning them into targets." Anya Desai leaned forward. "That's an extraordinary demand. You have no nonprofit administrative experience." "I have frontline nursing experience," Sarah fired back. "I am the exact person who knows where the financial cracks are because I fell through them. That's the experience you're missing. You can have your figurehead, or you can have a partner who will actually make this work. But you don't get to put me back in a box." Vance studied her. He saw the fear underneath the defiance, but also a fierce, hard-won clarity. He was looking at the person she had become in the crucible of his intervention, not a victim, but a leader. "Yes," he said. "Elias, we need to discuss the—" Anya began. "The answer is yes," Vance repeated, his eyes on Sarah. "All of it. The title, the salary, the authority, the board seat, with one condition." Sarah braced herself. "What?" "That you also chair an independent oversight committee for the entire foundation. That you have veto power over any initiative you believe is exploitative or poorly designed, including mine. He was essentially handing her the keys to his philanthropic kingdom, or at least a powerful set of brakes. It was a staggering act of trust. Sarah realized he wasn't just trying to fix his mistake, he was trying to change his entire approach. The algorithm had failed because it lacked humanity. He was installing a human conscience at the center of it. The deal was struck. The contracts were signed. The public announcement was a masterclass in narrative repair. Sarah stood beside Vance at a press conference. She spoke, not about gratitude, but about systemic failure. She detailed her own debt, not as a sob story, but as a commonplace example of a broken system. She outlined the new initiative's transparent goals. When a reporter asked about the breakfast bribe, she didn't flinch. That moment was a symptom, she said. A desperate person and a powerful one colliding in the dark. We are choosing to step into the light and build something that doesn't rely on chance encounters in stairwells. Back at Mercy General, the reaction was mixed. Some colleagues resented her sudden elevation, but many more quietly began to approach her with their own stories of medical debt, of second mortgages, of payday loans. She became a secret confessor, which gave her the raw data to shape the Foundation's first programs: emergency interest-free loans, student loan repayment matches, and financial literacy workshops integrated into hospital orientation. A year later, the initiative had helped over 2,000 healthcare workers. The application system was transparent. Sarah's oversight committee had vetoed 3 of Vance's pet projects for being patronizing or logistically naive. A respectful, challenging partnership had formed. But the final, surprising detail came from a sealed envelope delivered to Sarah on the initiative's first anniversary. It was from Vance's personal archives. Inside were the original yellowed hospital records from 22 years earlier, the ones he'd referenced in the cafe. His mother's name, date, room number, and the name of the nurse who was fired for staying with her, Arlene Chen. Sarah's maiden name was Chen. Her aunt Arlene, her father's sister, who had been a nurse, who had cut ties with the family after a professional scandal Sarah had never understood. Vance had never known the connection. The algorithm hadn't flagged it. It was a blind spot in the data. His anonymous nurse, the ghost that had driven his secret philanthropy for decades, was Sarah's blood. The circle was so perfect, so improbable, it felt like fate. Sarah confronted him with the documents. He was as stunned as she was. The personal story he'd told her was true, but its connection to her was a mystery even his billions couldn't solve. It meant his intervention wasn't just random or algorithmic. On some unseen level, he had been repaying a debt to her own family. This revelation changed everything, yet nothing. Sarah didn't suddenly feel destined or chosen. Instead, it cemented her belief that their work wasn't about grand, anonymous gestures, but about specific human repair. She used the story not for publicity, but as a private reminder of their purpose. Today, Sarah Chen still serves as the Foundation's director. She still works per diem shifts at Mercy General, keeping her skills sharp and her connection to the floor real. The $10,000 check was ultimately deposited, used to pay off the last of her mother's final expenses. She considers it an advance on her salary. Elias Vance continues to run his empire, but he reports quarterly to Sarah's oversight committee. Project Guardian is defunct, replaced by a system built on dignity, not secrecy. The stairwell where it all began is just a stairwell, but the quiet financial crisis among nurses is finally being heard, because one of them, backed by unlikely power, decided to turn a personal breaking point into a platform for change. The story that started with a sob and a secret didn't end with a fairy tale rescue. It ended with a negotiation, a partnership, and a new model for how help can arrive, not from above, but alongside. So what does this story tell us? At its core, it's not about a billionaire's guilt or a nurse's debt. It's about what happens when a private breaking point accidentally intersects with absolute power, and both people decide to build a bridge instead of a wall. Sarah's cry for help in that stairwell was one of thousands that happen every day silently in break rooms and parking lots and empty corridors across the country. Most fade unheard. This one didn't. But the real twist wasn't that she was heard, it was what she demanded after being heard. Not just relief, but agency. Not just a solution, but a seat at the table. Elias Vance entered the story as a classic deus ex machina, a financial superhero. He left it as something more interesting, a partner who had been humbled, who learned that true philanthropy isn't about stealthy rescues, but about transparent empowerment. Their partnership is messy, ongoing, and radically realistic. The system that pushed Sarah to the brink is still broken. Student debt still crushes new graduates. Medical bills still bankrupt families. But within that system, a new model was forged from a very public disaster. It's a model that says help should not come with secrecy or shame, and that those receiving help are the best experts on how to give it. The final lingering question is this: how many other moments of quiet desperation are unfolding just out of frame, waiting not for a billionaire, but for a better system? Sarah and Vance's story is a blueprint, but it's also a challenge. It asks us to look beyond the viral headline of an unlikely rescue to the harder, less cinematic work of building structures that make such rescues unnecessary. Their journey from a stairwell to a foundation proves that collision can lead to construction, that a sob can become a strategy, and that sometimes the most powerful act isn't writing a check, but handing over the pen. If you found this dive into the human story behind the headline compelling, make sure to subscribe for more documentaries that look beyond the viral moment. Thanks for watching.